So alhamdulillah, we've been covering a series of Islamic creed with Aqidah Tahawiyyah, and we've been building up a lot of points about Tawheed and Nubuwwah and how these things manifest. So inshallah ta'ala, with that foundation that we have already built, inshallah, most of what we discuss from here on out should be pretty smooth sailing. And so I won't spend too much time on each point, at least I'll try not to. And if I do end up confusing anybody, or somebody reads a point and they say like, oh, I don't understand, then feel free to raise your hand, feel free to stop me and say, oh, I don't get it, and we can further elaborate, inshallah ta'ala. But before we begin, there's a couple questions that we need to answer from last week. So last week, we had a brother ask a question about the Quran being created. So that was the bulk of our discussion last week, about how we talked about how the Quran cannot be created. And it's very important that we never call the Quran created. And we have brought out a bunch of logical proofs, right? Some more intellectual proofs and things like that, but I didn't really bring any textual proofs. So, somebody asked, well, what are the textual proofs? Where does it say in the Quran that the Quran is not created? Where does it say in the Sunnah that the Quran is not created? And to answer that question, first of all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-A'raf, أَلَا لَهُ الْخَلْقُ وَالْأَمْرُ تَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ رَبُّ الْعَالَمِينَ, that He tells us that the creation and the command belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this wording, it makes it very clear that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala differentiates between creation and command. He mentions the two separately. So the command is related to what He says, and the creation is related through kun fayakun, they be and it is. So the two are separate. Also in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ar-Rahman 'allama al-Quran khalaqa al-insan. So He separates creation from the Quran again. The Quran, we learn that the Quran is Allah's knowledge, and man is His creation. Also in the Quran, in Surah Al-Kahf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ لَوْ كَانَ الْبَحْرُ مِدَادًا لِكَلِمَاتِ رَبِّي لَنَفِدَ الْبَحْرُ قَبْلَ أَن تَنْفَذَ كَلِمَاتُ رَبِّي وَلَوْ جِئْنَا بِمِثْلِهِ مَدَدًا. That it tells us that if the sea were ink for writing the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the sea would run out before His words, even if there was an addition of another sea like it. So in here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is informing us that His speech is what? It's infinite. The speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is infinite. And on the other hand, creation is nowhere in infinite. You will never find a creation that is infinite. So the creation is limited in that sense. And the final is a narration by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says in Sahih Muslim, that if one who stops somewhere and seeks refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's words from the evil of His creation will be protected until he leaves that place. So the dua one of the du'as that we're supposed to make for protection is أعوذ بكلمات الله التامة من شر ما خلق, that I seek refuge in the perfect words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the evil that He created. Now, are we allowed to worship the creation? Are we allowed to seek refuge in the creation? No, it's a shirk, right? And then here the Prophet is telling us to seek refuge in the words of Allah. So the words of Allah cannot be created, right? Okay, so with that being said, there was another question that was asked as well. Afterwards, one of you guys came up to me and asked about abrogation. So we were talking about how the Quran is perfect, and so the concept of abrogation came up, where verses are abrogated, verses are lifted, and etc. And this is a very interesting point, because it gets brought up a lot by like Orientalists and non-Muslims that like, oh, even the Quran abrogates itself and things like that, so it's flawed. But it's very illogical, because the Quran itself actually addresses it. Okay, so the Quran itself does not run away from this fact. In Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا نَنْسَخْ مِنْ آيَةٍ أَوْ نُنْسِهَا وَمَا نَنْسَخْ مِنْ آيَةٍ أَوْ نُنْسِهَا نَأْتِ بِخَيْرٍ مِنْهَا أَوْ مِثْلِهَا أَلَمْ تَعْلَمْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. Right? We do not abrogate a verse or cause it to be forgotten. What does this mean? There are different types of nasakh, different types of abrogation. There are some abrogation where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings a verse that abrogates a verse before or abrogates a verse from previous. But there's also a type of abrogation that happened during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, where the companions, there was a verse that was revealed to the companions, and then all of a sudden they all woke up one morning or one evening and they found that, oh, I've forgotten the verse. And then they asked about the verse and everybody forgot about the verse. And so they would go to the Prophet ﷺ and the Prophet ﷺ would say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala essentially caused us to forget the verse. And the Quran addresses this fact. Now, why is that the case? When we look at the verses of abrogation, 0 of them, none of them, have to do with theology. They only have to do with law. Okay? And the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing His creation, and how the Prophet ﷺ is supposed to take the ummah, who is possibly, arguably, the deepest, darkest pits of society, not just at their time, but all of history, to take them from such a horrible place where they had such strong tribalism, where they would, sometimes some of them would even bury their own daughters alive and had so many messed up practices that they would engage in, to take them from that state to 23 years later to the greatest ummah that has ever existed, it requires progression. It requires developing. So there's many things in the Quran or in otherwise where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't prohibit something right away. Rather, He will bring a few verses to slowly prohibit things or slowly change laws so that they're not overwhelmed. It doesn't overburden the believers right away. I'll give you an example. The prohibition of alcohol didn't come till very late. Actually, the majority of the prophethood of the Prophet ﷺ, alcohol was still allowed for the majority of his prophethood. And so one of the first verses that came down about alcohol is a verse in Surah Al-Baqarah where it says, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ. They ask you about gambling and alcohol. قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ. Say that it has a lot of harm, a lot of issues, but it also has benefit. It also has benefit, okay? So we don't deny that, wine may have benefit, sure, no problem, right? There's studies that say that wine's good for your heart or whatever, or, I don't know, whatever you want to say. Sure, it has benefit, no problem, but that's not the reason why things are haram always. Sometimes things are haram just because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us to. So then, وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِنْ نَفْعِهِمَا. But their harm is far greater than their benefit. So this is the first verse that was revealed about alcohol. And then there's a verse that came later on which says, لَا تَقْرَبُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَنْتُمْ سُكَارَى. And then later on, the Prophet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals to not approach the salah if you are intoxicated. Still not a prohibition, but now someone that has to pray multiple times a day, it's going to prevent him from engaging in alcohol for a long period of time. And then a final verse came completely prohibiting alcohol in the Madani period of the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And Aisha radiallahu anha, they say that the streets, after the prohibition of alcohol came, the streets was like a river of wine. Because everybody just threw out their alcohol. It was done, like they completely got rid of it. But that's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them that development, that progression, slowly bit by bit. And Aisha radiallahu anha says that if the command of intoxication had come down right away, of prohibiting intoxication came down right away, or prohibiting alcohol, then I fear that many Muslims would have not been able to practice it. So it's a beautiful progress. And so the verses have been left for us to read and to reflect on the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that and also a very great lesson to us. It's a very great lesson to us. When someone accepts Islam and they may be, engaging in a lot of haram acts, it might be very overwhelming for them to get rid of everything all at once. That's okay. Get rid of one thing first, and then another, slowly bit by bit. It's progress. Implement one prayer out of the 5, and then the second one, and then the third one, and then the fourth one. It's a progress thing, right? Wallahu ta'ala bisawab. So now let's get to Imam Tahawiy's Aqidah text, Aqidah Tahawiyyah. So the next point that we're going to cover is وَمَنْ لَمْ يَتَوَقَّعَ النَّفْيَ وَالتَّشْبِيهَ زَلَّ وَلَمْ يُصِبَ الْتَنْزِيهَ. Whosoever does not avoid negating the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or likening Allah to humankind, then indeed he has gone astray and has missed the correct belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, what Imam Tahawiyyah is basically saying here is that we do not try to understand Allah, we try to know Allah. Okay? Know who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. We're never going to fully understand who He is, but know He is the all-powerful. Know He knows that what we do not know. Know He understands what we do not understand. That He understands more about ourselves than we do. And so, rather than trying to understand Allah, let's know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it will be a lot more beneficial to us. فإن ربنا جل وعلا موصوف بصفات الوحدانية منعوت بنعوت الفردانية ليس في معناه أحد من البرية. That indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the exalted, is only to be attributed with the attributes of oneness, of absolute uniqueness, and no creation is in any way like Him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, هو الأول والآخر والظاهر والباطن وهو بكل شيء عليم. That He is the awwal. What does awwal mean? The term awwal, al-awwal, literally means the first. Literally. However, this is one of the issues that we run into when we try to translate Arabic into English. If we translate things literally, we can lose the meaning. Because here, al-awwal in the Arabic language is not to indicate first, because what does first imply? First implies there's a zero, meaning there's a before a first. Rather, it's supposed to mean eternal without beginning. Understand? Eternal without beginning. So that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not necessarily the first, He's the eternal without beginning. There's nothing before Him. وَهُوَ الْآخِرُ. And He is also everlasting without an end. And so the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not just quantitative, but it's also qualitative in this sense. Okay? So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not like anything else, as we have discussed many times before. وَتَعَالَى عَنَ الْحُدُودِ الْغَايَاتِ وَالْأَرْكَانِ الْأَعْضَاءِ وَالْأَدَوَاتِ وَلَا تَحْوِيهِ الْجِهَاتِ السِّتُّ كَسَائِرِ الْمُبْتَدَعَاتِ. He is clear of being attributed with having limits, nor ends, nor having parts, nor organs, nor limbs, nor is He contained by the 6 directions as all things are. So what are these 6 things? Right? So these 6 things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Imam al-Tahawi says about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are so He does not belong to any direction on the right, or any direction to the left, or above, or below, or etc. So essentially any direction that you can think of, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not in that direction. And He existed before all creation, before the heavens, the earth, space, time, and place were existent. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was existence before them. So how many of you guys have heard as a kid, I know I heard this as a kid a lot, from Sunday school teachers, from others, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept their efforts. But this concept of Allah is everywhere. Has anybody heard that before? Right? Allah is everywhere. Okay. That's not true. Okay. Can't be true. Because everywhere is somewhere. Right? Everywhere is still limited. Everywhere implies all of creation. However, as we said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was there before creation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was there before space even existed. So how could He be everywhere? As a matter of fact, when we say everywhere, we limit Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's actually restricting His greatness, right? He can see everywhere, He can hear everything, but He does not belong to a space, right? So one time, Ali ibn Abi Talib, when he was during his khilafah, somebody asked him, when did your Lord exist? And Imam Ali, karamallahu wajha, he replied, when didn't He exist? Right? When didn't He exist? Okay, moving on. Oh, making grounds. Let's do it. No questions so far? We're good? Alhamdulillah? Yes, yes.
So how do you balance that the previous statement with the
Yeah, simple, right? So Yasser's asking, how do you balance that with the verse فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ, that whatever you turn, you will see the again, literal mean translation would say that you will be at the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You will see the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When it comes to verses that are mutashabihat, right? So verses that talk about things like yad Allah or wajh Allah and things like that, we're not supposed to take that meaning literally, right? So, because we don't, like as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He has yad Allah, we don't say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala literally has a hand, right? Rather, it's an analogy or a metaphor for something else, for His power, for His qudra, for His kingdom, whatever it may be, right? So similarly, what this verse is saying, فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ, is that wherever I turn, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is here to respond to my call, is ready to respond to my call, right? But I'm not saying that He's literally, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is literally in front of me, right? If that makes sense. Good? Okay. Alhamdulillah. وَالْمِعْرَاجُ حَقٌّ وَقَدْ أُسِرَ بِالنَّبِيِّ صلى الله عليه وسلم وعرج بشخصه في اليقظة إلى السماء ثم إلى حيث شاء الله من العلا. So in Mi'raj, the event of Isra Mi'raj when the Prophet ﷺ ascended through the heavens is true. And the Prophet was taken by night and ascended in his bodily form while awake through the heavens to whatever honorable place in heaven Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed for him. وأكرمه الله بما شاء وأوحى إليه ما أوحى ما كذب الفؤاد ما رأى فصلى الله عليه وسلم في الآخرة والأولى. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in this journey in whatever way He willed and revealed to him what He willed, and his heart was not mistaken by what it saw, which is the meaning of the 11th verse of Surah Al-Najm. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed him and granted him peace in this world and in the hereafter. So Imam Tahawiyyah, he brings this point, which is very interesting. And the reason why he brings this point is because this story of Isra wal Mi'raj, first of all, let's touch on the story a little bit. I'm going to keep it very, very brief. Essentially what happened is the Prophet ﷺ experienced something called the year of grief, which is the worst year of his life, where he lost his uncle, Abu Talib, he lost his wife, Khadija radiallahu anha, and he also went to Ta'if to try to seek refuge. And not only did they ignore him and cast him out, but they actually stoned him on his way out to the point that he was bleeding profusely. So it was a very, very rough year for the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And after he came back from the grueling journey of Ta'if, as he is laying down on his bed about to go to sleep, the roof on top of him opens up. And Jibreel alayhi salam comes to him and says, Ya Rasulullah, we're about to go on a journey. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he rides on an animal called Buraq, and this animal and Jibreel and the Prophet ﷺ, they go from Mecca to Al-Aqsa, and in Al-Aqsa, in Jerusalem, he leads all the prophets and meets all the prophets, and he leads them in prayer. And then he goes through a journey of Mi'raj, where he goes through every gate of Jannah, and he meets a prophet there and has a conversation with them, and unto the point where he meets Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses him with 3 gifts. And those 3 gifts are the 5 prayers, the obligation of the 5 prayers. So that's one gift. And keep in mind how I'm saying gift, right? This is a gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to this ummah. The second is the last two verses of Surah Al-Baqarah, the concluding verses of Surah Al-Baqarah. Dua of Surah Al-Baqarah is that concluding. And the third is the guarantee that every person is going to enter paradise at some point. Every believing Muslim is going to enter paradise at some point. Even those that enter the hellfire for a temporary amount of time are going to enter Jannah at some point. Right? And with that being said, I always like to just remind people that that guarantee should not make us heedless and think that a temporary time in the hellfire is all dandy, I'll get through it. No. In a narration, I've shared this narration many times before in this class and khutbahs and things, but it's always just a good narration to fully encompass this idea of the difference between hellfire and paradise. It's a narration where one day the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he was telling the companions that on the day of judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to bring forth two individuals. The first individual will be an individual that suffered more than anybody has in their entire life. And is going to instruct the angels to dip this man into paradise for 1 second. And so for 1 second, this man is dipped into paradise and he's brought out, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask him before everybody, have you ever suffered? And this man is going to say, no, I don't even know what suffering is. What are you talking about? 1 second in Jannah, I forgot all the suffering. And the opposite is also true, where the Prophet ﷺ told us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take the man who had the most luxuries, the most pleasure, he had everything he ever wanted, and all desires were fulfilled, and never thanked Allah, never worshipped Allah, and was heedless of Allah. And he's going to be dipped into Jahannam for 1 second, and then brought out. And one of the versions of the narration says that he's going to come out like he's completely charred after 1 second. And then before everybody, he's going to ask him, have you ever experienced joy, pleasure? And this man's going to say, by Allah, I don't even know what pleasure is. After 1 second, right? So this idea of like, oh, I'm temporarily, go to the hellfire temporarily, maybe not so bad, eventually I'm going to go to Jannah. It's like, no. You have no idea. We have no idea, right? So essentially now he comes back from talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all the way back through the gates of paradise again, to Al-Aqsa again, all the way back to Mecca, and he does this all in one night. Right? Where the Prophet ﷺ said that his door didn't, from the moment that he left to the moment that he came back, his door was still swinging. You know what that means? Like, it means like it was a very short amount of time, right? So like you close the door, that kind of goes both ways, and it kind of swings a little bit. The door was still swinging. So in a split second, essentially he did all of this, right? In terms of the real life world, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it was a miracle. It was all a miracle. Now, the reason why Imam Tahawiyyah brings this specific story of the seerah, because to a believer, this is single-handedly the hardest story to accept. The most difficult one. It's so mind-blowing. It seems so impossible to us that we really have to fully trust Allah and His Messenger to accept this. And that's why Imam Tahawiyyah brings it here. That in order to solidify your faith, you believe this story, you'll be good. And as a matter of fact, what happened is, when the Prophet ﷺ went and told the people this, there was some Muslims who were still kind of like on the edge. Some of them actually started to disbelieve. This is the first moment where Muslims started to disbelieve in the Prophet ﷺ. And some of the Quraysh, the leaders of Quraysh, they got angry with the Prophet ﷺ and started laughing at him, and they were like, this is ridiculous. And they even they started boasting. They were like, finally we got him. And now everybody's going to think this guy's crazy. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And so they even went to Abu Bakr Siddiq, and Abu Bakr Siddiq, and this is what we should exhibit here. His beautiful character of Abu Bakr Siddiq. Well, some of the Quraysh came to Abu Bakr Siddiq and said, have you heard what your friend said? He said this and that and this and that and this and that. And then Abu Bakr Siddiq said, I don't know if he said it, right? Because he hasn't talked to the Prophet ﷺ yet. But if he did, then it's true. I have no doubt about it. And they're like, that's crazy. He's like, I believe something far more crazy than that. I believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals revelation to him. Why would I believe this? And that is the day he received the name As-Siddiq, right? The truthful one. So this is what we should exhibit as well in our character and our belief in Allah and His Messenger as Abu Bakr Siddiq. And so to conclude this story, what happens is they basically put him on the spot. And they say to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and they say like, oh, you know, this is ridiculous, you know, all this kind of stuff. Tell us what Aqsa looks like. Tell us how many windows are in Al-Aqsa. Tell me how many light fixtures are in Al-Aqsa. Tell us which side of Al-Aqsa is the animal post that you tied Buraq in and all that kind of stuff and etc. Right? And so they start asking these questions, but the reality is someone who's there for a temporary amount of time at night is not going to remember all these details. Right? Everyone close your eyes right now. Close your eyes right now, okay? We're going to do a crazy, crazy experiment. Everyone just close your eyes for a second, okay? Most of you have been in this masjid like multiple times. Many, many, many times. Okay? I recognize most of you from Ramadan, from all these halaqas. I know y'all have been here for a fat minute. Tell me how many windows are in this place? Nobody? Really? Why not? See, like it's a ridiculous question. Especially when you're talking to prophets, when you're leading the prophets in prayer, you're not paying attention to how many windows are in Al-Aqsa and all this kind of stuff. You've got better things you gotta worry about. So what happens is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants another miracle to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he creates almost kind of like a hologram of an Aqsa in front of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that only he can see and nobody else can see. And he starts describing all the details of an Aqsa to the entire congregation. And the congregation is now stunned. And those who have been to Aqsa before are confirming everything he said. And Prophet ﷺ remembers that when on his way back, he passed by a caravan that was coming to Mecca. And he says that in a few moments, so-and-so is going to come back from a caravan with this, and this, right? Or he got caught up because he lost his camel, right? And so the guy comes back, and it was the same guy that Prophet ﷺ said it was. And they asked him, why were you late? And he said, oh, I lost my camels, I was looking for it. And it said exactly what the Prophet ﷺ said. So now, there's no way to deny, right? But of course they still did. And another thing, the reason why this is also brought up is because this is mutawatir. Now, regardless of how far-fetched we think it is, mutawatir means that it was narrated by so many companions that it's impossible that they could have corroborated in a lie. Right? So many, like some muhaddithun say that to reach mutawatir you need about 10, and some muhaddithun can go up to even like 40, right? But even if you just take 10, the small number, what's very interesting is the concept of mutawatir. Sometimes we don't really fully understand it. But I'll tell you what the concept of mutawatir looks like. Let's say there is let's say there's like a very beautiful yellow flower outside. Okay? And so Adham comes to me and says, yo, Akram, did you see that beautiful yellow flower outside? Okay, now me, right, I have no reason to, Adham's lived a trustworthy life, good, upright life, inshallah, right? So I have no reason to doubt him. So, okay. But is it possible that he lied? Is it possible? It's possible, yeah, but I don't have any reason to believe that. Then 5 minutes later, Abdurrahman comes in and says, yo, Akram, did you see the yellow flower outside? Now I'm like, okay, 2 people have just told me the exact same thing. What's the likelihood of them lying? Both of them, with the exact same details. Now the statistic is highly unlikely. Then Bara comes 5 minutes later and says the exact same thing. At 3 times, I'm going to be like, okay, there's a flower outside, let me go check it out. Right? Now imagine 10, 15, 20, 40 companions narrating the same thing with exact detail. And these are the most upright people in the entire world. There's no way this could have been corroborated by. So the story of Isra and Mi'raj itself is mutawatir. So not only is it the most impossible story for us to comprehend because of the miracles of it, but it's also mutawatir, which means that denying this story is an act of disbelief. Right? This is why Imam Tahawiyyah brings us here. Super important. Then Imam Tahawiyyah says, وَالْحَوْضُ الَّذِي أَكْرَمَهُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى بِهِ غِيَاثًا لِأُمَّتِ حَقٌّ. That the hawd is true and is meant to quench the thirst of the believers. So the hawd is a basin where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is going to be waiting for us at the Day of Judgment. And on the Day of Judgment, we're going to run to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and whoever drinks from the hawd is going to never be thirsty again. This is going to be a day where we're going to have extreme thirst. And what is the Hawd supplied with? Does anybody know? A river. What river? Al-Kawthar. Yes. So the Hawd, right? The supply of the Hawd is going to come from the river of Al-Kawthar, which is a river that was gifted to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Now, there will come those who are running to the Prophet ﷺ, but the angels will obstruct a path from them to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ is going to say, Ummati, Ummati, like, why are these guys being blocked? I recognize them, they're from my ummah. And then the angels are going to clarify to the Prophet ﷺ that you have no idea what they introduced to the religion after you. How they tried to change their religion, shift their religion, to make it fit their whims and desires and etc. and all this kind of stuff. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from that. We don't want to be those who change the religion to fit our whims and desires. All values change today, morality changes, so let's just fit things to what makes sense today. No. Right? We want to be careful from that as well. Okay. Yeah. والشفاعة التي ادخرها لهم حق كما روي في الأخبار. The intercession which is allocated to his followers is true as related to the authentic hadith. This is the intercession that we have talked about already. The intercession of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, where he is going to intercede on behalf of the Ummah on the Day of Judgment, and is the manifestation of the gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him in Isra al-Mi'raj of guaranteeing that every individual will eventually enter paradise. Okay. But what I want to point out is two things here. Right? We talk about love for the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. If you have no reason to love the Prophet ﷺ, right? Even though there are billions of reasons to love the Prophet ﷺ, if you have no reason, this should be at least the only reason. If there's only one reason you're going to pick, this should be the reason. Because on the Day of Judgment, where nobody else cares about you, your own wife, your children, your mother, your father, no one's going to care about you, and they're only going to worry about themselves. All the prophets are going to worry about themselves, alayhim as-salam, with no fault to their own, because the Day of Judgment is going to be that scary. There's only going to be one individual who cares about your akhirah more than his own, which is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So that's enough of a reason for us to love him. Now the second thing, I touched on it before, but I'm going to say it again because it's very important for our aqidah and how we think about these things. Oftentimes when we talk about the intercession, there comes a visual in our mind that a'udhu billah, the Prophet ﷺ is changing Allah's mind. This is not what's happening. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already decreed what is going to happen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed who is going to go to Jannah and when they're going to go to Jannah. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of his love for the Prophet ﷺ, makes the Prophet ﷺ and gives him the honor of being the means in which that will happen. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already knows. No pleading or convincing is required. Right? Because the Prophet ﷺ can plead as long as he wants, but eventually it's going to come at a point where nobody can leave Jahannam. Although, because the Prophet ﷺ has so much love, not for his ummah, just for the entire mankind, it's possible the Prophet ﷺ is also going to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take everybody out of Jahannam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to say, no, there's a limit. Right? His decree. This is his decree. So again, when we talk about the shafa', we want to make sure we're not thinking it in a way that the Prophet ﷺ is changing Allah's mind. Rather, it's Allah's already decreed this, and he's given honor to the Prophet ﷺ that this will be the manifestation of how it happens. Does that make sense? Yes. تمام. وَالْمِثَاقُ الَّذِي أَخَذَهُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى مِنْ آدَمَ وَذُرِّيَّاتِهِ حَقٌّ. And the pledge in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took from Adam and his offspring is true. What is this pledge? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, in Surah Al-A'raf, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ. He asks a question to the souls, right? To all of creation, to all of us before we became bodies. And we said, قَالُوا بَلَا شَهِدَنَا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَن تَقُولُوا يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ إِنَّا كُنَّا عَنْ هَذَا غَافِلِينَ. So we said, yes, you are our Lord, we testify. And then he cautioned and he said, now you have no right to say on Judgment Day that we were not aware of this. Now there's an objection that comes up, right? That says, I don't remember this. I don't remember saying this, right? But the thing is we're here, okay? We're here now. And we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be true. We know His Prophet to be true. We know Jannah to be true. We know Jahannam to be true. So why did Allah create me? I didn't ask for this. Right? All this kind of all these questions that come into our head, dismiss that because it's irrelevant. Right? I brought up this example before, where the bara example I call it, where you jumped out of a plane and you have a parachute. To ask why did I jump out of a plane? Who pushed me out of the plane? What's going to, I need to figure out all these things before I start worrying about how I'm going to survive. Really? No. You got two options. You're either going to pull the parachute or you're not going to. So now we're falling. We got two options. We're either going to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and save ourselves, or we're not, and we're not going to save ourselves. Right? Okay. Any questions so far? No, tamam. Alright, let's move on. وقد علم الله تعالى فيما لم يزل عدد من لم يدخل الجنة وعدد من يدخل النار جملة واحدة فلا يزاد في ذلك العدد ولا ينقص منه. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew in His eternal realm, because time doesn't apply to Allah, remember? Time doesn't apply to Allah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the number of people that will enter Jannah and the number of people that will enter Jahannam, and that number will neither increase or decrease. It's already decreed. So now the question comes up, right? If it's already decreed, what's the point? Well, I gotta do anything. Right? So there are a lot of elements that need to make sense for us so we can get to this point. I'm gonna give an example, but the example is very flawed. Okay? It's a very flawed example. Let's say a teacher walks in, and a teacher has been teaching a class for a long period of time. And after a long period of time, the teacher knows the habits of all their students. And so the teacher now says that based on what I know about my students, I can predict who's going to pass and who's going to fail. Okay? Now the reason why I say that this is deficient is because the teacher can predict, but Allah knows. Okay? Allah knows that based on our actions, where we're going to end up. Not He forces us towards certain actions and then puts us into the hellfire. And a lot of times this discussion with free will, I feel we need to reflect on where our intentions with these questions come from. Is it coming from possibly trying to justify our mistakes and not taking responsibility for our actions? So what do I mean by that? The fact that we have free will is haq. It's true. And our life experience tells us that this is true. Have you ever been forced to drink alcohol? Like you can't control your hand? Oh my gosh, what's happening? Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. No, that's not happening. We know through our life experience that the wrong that we do, we did it because of our own actions. The good that we did it because of our own actions. So now the teacher, looking at these students, isn't going to say that, since I already know you're going to fail, I'm not even going to give you the test. No, the test is still coming to you. Right? I'm still going to give you the test. So everybody is going to have the opportunity for themselves, right? To either make their life a path of Jannah or make their life a path of Jahannam. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already knows what you're going to choose. And that's why it's already decided, because He created time to begin with. Remember, there was no time before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created time. So there's no future to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? It already happened. Jannah, Jahannam, the day Yawm al-Qiyamah, in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's realm, it already happened. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because He already created time, right? So that's why, that's how we make sense of this, inshallah ta'ala. And we also believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most just. Therefore, no one who before I say deserves, no one deserves Jannah. Okay? We don't earn Jannah, we get Jannah through the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because even just the blessing of our eyesight, which is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ tells us in a narration, that even just the blessing of our eyesight, will outweigh 500 years of worship. So there's nothing that we can do to necessarily deserve or earn Jannah. Rather, we attain Jannah through the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? So I'm going to provide an example, and I'm going to use the term deserve, but in a light sense. But when I say deserve, everybody understands what I'm trying to say, right? So, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most just, no one who deserves Jahannam will be given Jannah, and no one who deserves Jannah will be given Jahannam. And so when we read this point, we even immediately go to the tragic thought that someone who deserves Jannah will go to Jahannam. And that's why our minds explode. But my question is, what is worse? Someone going to Jahannam, or someone who deserves Jahannam going to Jannah, or someone who deserves Jannah that goes to Jahannam? The latter. The latter is far worse. Someone who is innocent being punished for crimes. So, like, I'll give you an example, right? Fir'aun, we know in the Quran is going to be given Jahannam. But hypothetically speaking, we all get to Jannah and we see Fir'aun walking around in Jannah. We're like, I guarantee you, not a single person here is going to care at all that he's in Jannah. There's no negative feelings in Jannah. I'm just happy to be here. So, like, no one's going to care. However, someone that deserves Jannah going into Jahannam, now that's very painful. That's a lot of pain and hurt that is being caused on someone that is not deserving of it. So actually, in this thought, think about when we're thinking about this example, the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala necessitates that it leans towards mercy. You understand what I just said? The justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala necessitates that it leans towards mercy. That is why we're going to see people in Jannah that we're like, I don't know how you got here, but congratulations. But also, you're going to find people that were supposed to be in Jannah, you're not going to find them. You know, for example, the Prophet ﷺ tells us that amongst the first three people to enter the hellfire is going to be the scholar, the hafid of the Quran, and the mujahid. Because they all did it for the wrong reasons. They wanted to flex their muscles and their knowledge and their qira'ah and the fact that they're a strong soldier of Allah, but they didn't really do it for Allah. They just did it for fame and for the sake of the people, right? Okay. وَكَذَلِكَ أَفْعَالُهُمْ فِيمَا عَلِمَ مِنْهُمْ أَن يَفْعَلُوا. The same applies to all actions done by people which are done exactly as Allah knew they would be done. وَكُلُّ مُيَسَّرُ لِمَا خُلِقَ لَهُ. And each person's life is facilitated for the purpose that they were created for. What were we created for? To worship Allah. وَمَا خَلَقْنَا الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. We have not, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we have not created jinn and mankind except to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no creation-based limitation on worship. Which means whatever state that we are in, whatever place we are in, whoever we are, we always have the ability to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some may be limited in how they can worship, but everyone can worship. So I may be limited, I can't afford Hajj. So I'm limited in that sense. Maybe I can't afford to give zakat. So I'm limited in that sense, but I can still pray. And I can pray sitting, I can pray laying down. Scholars even say that if you're fully paralyzed, can't even move your eyes, you pray with your mind, with your heart. You imagine that you're doing the actions of prayer. You can always be in a state of ibadah. I can do dhikr, I can do this, I can do that. You think about all the different things that you can do. Every person here, no matter who you are, without a doubt, no exceptions, you can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in some way. And so this is beautiful, because this is what we were created for. This is what we were created for. So if you see anything else in our life, it has limitations, except worship. Worship has no limitation, because it is exactly what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made our purpose. And this is also You know, super important because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we're judged on the day of judgment, is going to judge people individually, not in groups. So nobody here has a claim to say that I know so-and-so is in Jannah or I know so-and-so is in Jahannam because of this, because of that, because of that. Right? We cannot say that. We cannot say any of these things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, based on everybody's circumstance, is going to take everybody individually. Oh, dang. How long has this been out?
Yes, this was happening.
It just turned on? Okay, just give me 1 second, guys, sorry. Alright, done. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to judge people individually. It's not going to be like, oh, group of believers, come with me, group of munafiqun, come with me, group of disbelievers, come with me. No, each person is going to judge individually, then placed into groups. Then placed into groups. Okay, there's a missing slide. Sorry. وَالْأَعْمَالُ بِالْخَوَاتِمِ. Right? Actions are by the end result. And this is based on the hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, where he tells us that somebody can be of the actions of the people of Jannah until him and paradise are just by an arm's length. And then they start doing the actions of the people of the hellfire, and they end up in hellfire. And then vice versa. Right? So we see that from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His judgment is not quantitative, it's qualitative. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He does care about how much deeds you have, but more importantly, what was the quality of those deeds? Which is why the concept of the mizan is amazing. The scale. On the day of judgment, where our deeds are going to be weighed, not counted. Okay? It's going to be weighed, not counted. Because two individuals can do the exact same act of worship, but the quality of it is completely different. When I come for Fajr, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I'm sleeping half of the time, the thing is going on. But then the person next to me is crying in tears, full heart khushu' of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, full ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just love of Allah, repenting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his salat, fully engaged. Now, him and I did the exact same thing, but who gets the more heavier reward because of their quality? It's going to be him, the other individual. Who was at the Al-Maghrib class this weekend? Anybody? A few of you guys? Yeah? Man, you brothers lacked, man. Wallah, the brothers lacked so much. I was so disappointed. I think the sisters made up like 70% of that class.
What class?
Huh? What class? Never mind. Whatever. Yeah. Next time, inshallah. So you might have someone who lived their entire life in disobedience and they shed one tear for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or have that one moment of sincerity, and it's the cause of them entering paradise. Like the example the Prophet ﷺ gave us of a woman who was not working a very appropriate lifestyle. Okay? She had a very inappropriate job, right? That, etc. Anyways. But one day, she saw a dog that was tired and hungry and thirsty and about to die in the desert, and no one was around her. And what she did, she took off her shoe, she filled it up with water and gave it to the dog. In that moment of sincerity, for the sake of Allah, erased everything else. And it's also very possible that we have people that live their entire lives in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but that one moment of rejection can negate it all. So be very careful and praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and thank Him for the blessing of Iman. Say Alhamdulillah if you're a Muslim. It's a gift that people are trying to find. Most of the world is struggling with crises and trying to figure out what's the purpose of life. And you have it. You know it. So say Alhamdulillah for the blessings of Islam. And make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you remain firm on Islam until you die. Multiple du'as we can make, right? Ya dhal jalali wal ikram amitna ala din al-Islam. Ya muqallib al-qulub thabbit qulubana ala dinik. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. Just make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, allow me to die as a Muslim. Allow my heart to remain firm on Islam. وَالسَّعِيدُ مَنْ سَعِدَ بِقَضَاءِ اللَّهِ وَالشَّقِيُّ مَنْ شَقِيَ بِقَضَاءِ اللَّهِ. That the fortunate person is the one who is fortunate with their decree from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the wretched one is the one who achieves wretchedness from the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is talking about our final actions of a person before death. Right? The final actions that we want to have before death are actions of obedience. And since we don't know when we're going to die, then let's always be in a state of obedience. Everything that we can do can be an act of worship. Look, okay, homework this week, inshallah, okay? I'm not going to ask for it next week, so you can do it or whatever. But try this. List out your daily routine. And then when you look at your daily routine, figure out how I can make this into an act of worship. It's very simple, actually. It just requires a shift in intention. Because, whatever job you work, I'm doing this job because I want to earn a halal income so I can feed my family, I can raise my kids, and I can, give to the poor, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, every time you go to work, every second you spend at work, you're in an act of worship. Right? Or when I go work out, every time I do a rep, I'm going to say, SubhanAllah, Allahu Akbar. Right? Every time I watch the Phoenix Suns, I'm going to make dua because they suck so bad. I love you, Yasser. I love you. Go Lakers. Right? So we can do anything. Anything we do, it can be an act of worship. So how did the Prophet Muhammad deal with questions of taqdeer? There are two narrations I want to bring. The first narration is a narration in Sahih Muslim, narrated by Jabir ibn Abdullah. He says that the companion Suraqah bin Malik came to the Prophet and said, "O Prophet of Allah, make clear to us our faith as if we were just created." Basically asking to make faith very simple for him. And he asked about whether the deeds, that the pages have been dried, right? So, that all the deeds of people have been written. Has it been written yet? Has the pen been dried where the deeds are being written? And the Prophet said that the pens have dried. Which means everything that is ever going to occur has already occurred in the realm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're just waiting for time to take place. Right? And they're happening as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had them written. And so Suraqah then asked, what's the point of doing any good deeds? And so then the Prophet said, do everything, or keep doing good deeds, and you will find that every deed that you do is something that was facilitated for you. So he doesn't actually answer the question, right? Because again, the qadr is one of those things that we're going to get to this point. It's actually a secret of Allah that we're never going to fully understand. And so another narration is that Ali radiallahu anhu, they were at a janazah in the graveyard of Medina, and the Prophet was with them, and he sat down. And they sat with him, and he said that the Prophet took a stick and started to scrape the ground with it like he was in deep thought. And the Prophet Muhammad said that there are none amongst you except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written for you your place in Jannah or the hellfire. It has been written for you that you will either be wretched or you will be fortunate. And a man asked if we should depend on what has been written for us and stop doing good deeds, because the reality is whatever will happen for us. And the Prophet says that those who are written to be fortunate in the hereafter will find it easy to do good deeds, and it will be facilitated for them. And the people of fire will find it easy for them to follow that path. What does this mean? Very simple. You want to be a person of Jannah? Right? Are you worried that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasn't written you amongst the people of Jannah? The way to guarantee that is to act like the people of Jannah. If you're worried, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is written you amongst the people of Jahannam, look at your lifestyle. Is your lifestyle the lifestyle of the people of Jahannam then? That's your answer. So you kind of actually, based on your lifestyle currently that you exhibit right now, you already know the answer. And so now we have to either maintain, improve, or change. So going back to the classroom example, let's say we all had this one professor that thought they were so edgy and would walk into classroom and be like, this is the toughest class that you have ever taken, and I know most of you are gonna fail, and et cetera, et cetera. Right? Seems like I triggered a few people there, but I had a few of those professors. It's just like unnecessary. Why? Who hurt you? But does that mean like now to go, okay, well, there's no point. No, you're still gonna show up to class. You're still gonna try to pass. You're still gonna, even though the teacher said that some of you are gonna fail, you didn't say all of you are gonna fail. You didn't say all of us are gonna fail. So there's still a point. We still have to make that effort. And in Surah Al-Layl, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, look man, at the end of the day, I can say whatever I want, but if you just read the words of Allah, it surpasses anything I could ever say, anything anybody could ever say. فَأَمَّا مَنْ أَعْطَى وَاتَّقَى وَصَدَّقَ بِالْحُسْنَى فَسَنُيَسِّرُهُ لِلْيُسْرَى. And whoever is charitable, mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and firmly believes in the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will facilitate him a way of ease. وَأَمَّا مَنْ بَخِلَ وَاسْتَغْنَى وَكَذَّبَ بِالْحُسْنَى فَسَنُيَسِّرُهُ لِلْعُسْرَى. That whoever is stingy, indifferent to Allah, staunchy, denies the rewards of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will facilitate him a path of hardship. Okay. Yes. The last sentence of the verse? Yeah, so whoever, the one who is stingy, indifferent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and denies the rewards of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will facilitate for them the path of hardship. تمام. وأصل القدر سر الله تعالى في خلقه لم يطلع على ذلك ملك مقرب ولا نبي مرسل. So the exact nature and decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala onto His creation is not known to the creation. No high-ranking angel, a creation that is far superior to us in intellect, nor a messenger who is human beings who are far superior to us in intellect and have been given the ability to see the unknown in some cases. Nobody has been given knowledge of it. So this is the final point, and this is, probably the most important point. That the idea of the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is at the end of the day is going to be a secret of Allah. And our goal is just to live a life of the people of Jannah. As I mentioned, no one's forcing you to drink alcohol, for example. Right? And by force, I don't mean like somebody's putting a gun to your head. I mean like you literally can't control your hand. Right? Our lifestyle is a very clear proof that free will exists. I choose what I eat. I choose what's going to happen. Right? I choose how I'm going to live my life, etc., etc., etc. Right? So one day somebody asked the Prophet ﷺ, when is the day of judgment? And he asked them, what did you prepare for it? Right? What did you prepare for it? So, similar here, right? That with these things, these questions of qadr, these questions of like the ilm al-ghayb, right? It's very profound that when you see how the Prophet ﷺ addressed these questions, how he answered them, how did he answer them? He didn't, right? Instead, he just reminded people like, next, right? So for example, even though it was a great question, when we talk about the things about like yadullah or wajhullah and things like that, these are not going to be things that we're asked about in the Day of Judgment. That's the reality. This is a meaning that is unknown to us. It's only known to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to ask us about something that we don't understand. Right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is only going to ask us about the things that we were supposed to do, right? Man rabbuk, man dinuk, man nabiyuk, right? These are things that we're going to be asked about in the grave. Who is your Rabb? What is your deen? Right? What is your book? Who is your nabi, etc. Alright, I think we can conclude here, inshallah. We made some pretty good progress, I think. Inshallah. Any questions? Brothers, sisters. Alright, alhamdulillah. Any objections? No? Okay, alhamdulillah. Alright, jazakallah khair everyone. I'll see you guys next week, inshallah. Man, let's see, actually, real quick, let's see how much we have left. Yeah. Yeah, so the question that Sister Kazi is asking is, there's a modern approach about like viewing Islam from like a logical lens, right? And people debating on like Speaker's Corner in the UK, for example, or having these debates on TV, on YouTube or online and things like that, right? So-and-so exposed, right? Must watch, right? All these different types of things, right? Refutation of this and this and all that kind of stuff, right? I have a lot of thoughts about this, right? A lot of them. But I'm gonna keep it brief, and I'm gonna say that I think one thing about our ummah is that we need roles, right? So, for example, I do think we need people that answer these questions. Because reality speaking this is like things like philosophy and why does evil exist, theory of evolution, right? These different types of things. If it's not addressed by somebody, it can cause a lot of doubts in Muslims, right? So many times what I've seen is when it comes to these types of debates, you're not necessarily debating to try to change the person's mind or to even change the opposition crowd. It's just to show that there is answers for this in Islam, and those that are kind of on the edge are comforted by that fact. Now with that being said, the way it's happening, we can have a whole discussion about that, right? I think it's necessary. We need people that address philosophical questions, that address these things. It's extremely important. But we also need people that after you come into Islam, that we come to gatherings like this, right? Where now it's about building up that spirituality. Now that we have accepted, let's talk about that spirituality, etc., right? And I talked a little bit about my khutbah on Friday that most people are not convinced, are not swayed with their minds by logic and facts, right? Most people are going to actually be convinced through emotion, right? External factors. So that's why we flex our muscles sometimes and we say that, oh, Islam is the most logical religion. No one can debate us. We always have answers. True, you're absolutely 100% right. Islam is, the reason why it's the most logical religion is because it's the truth. It's that simple. The reason why we have answers to everything is because it's the truth. Again, very simple. But having that and still having people leave Islam because of the abuse that we have caused them should actually put us to shame. How can somebody be so sure, logically speaking, of the religion, yet still feel the need to leave it? Right? So when we appeal to somebody's emotion, it goes a lot further. So I'll tell you, for example, I know dudes who are not Muslim, I know Christian guys who are not Muslim, who I can say, unfortunately, love Allah more than me. Their love for Allah is very sincere. They're just misguided. They're misguided. So now when I approach this individual, how do I approach them? Do I say, here are the logical proofs why the Trinity doesn't make sense. Here's the Kalam cosmological argument, etc., etc., etc. Again, like I mentioned before, I think these things are necessary, they're good, and they have their time and place. But that's not going to convince him. Because regardless of what I believe, whatever I believe, I'm going to find an article that affirms what I believe. I'm going to find some skewed, messed up scientist that's going to say exactly what I believe. Anywhere on the internet, whatever you want to believe, you're going to find somebody to affirm what you want to believe. You're going to find it. Or do I ask him, you love God? I love God too. Tell me, what do you love about God? And he says, oh, this is what I love about God, etc., etc. I'm like, oh, that's very fascinating. Let me tell you what I love about God. What I love about God is the fact that He's one. What I love about God is the fact that there is none like Him. What I love about God is that I can call to Him and He will answer me without any intermediary at any time of the day. And now he's like, interesting. The closeness that this person feels as a Muslim to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the closest that I want to feel because of my love of Allah. And it opens up the mind a little bit more. Right? So, Yeah, that's my response to that, inshallah. Any other questions? Yes, Musa.
So, for the things that we can't fully understand in this world, is there a chance that we can understand them more so in Jannah? So, like questions about Qadr of Allah. Is there
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll be able to see Allah. Right? So this is one of the things, the ru'yat Allah is also a secret of Allah, like how are we going to see Allah and things like that. Because we assume that our eyes today is going to be what we have in Jannah, but like that's not true, right? So we're going to have the ability to directly speak to Allah, directly see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His essence, in His majesty. So at that point we can ask Him anything, right? So that's a great response to the question too. Is like, somebody says, how does the Qadr of Allah manifest? How does this happen? You're like, you know what? I don't know it yet. But I'll let you know, inshallah. Right? As a matter of fact, come join me and we'll find out together, inshallah ta'ala. Wallahu ta'ala bisawab. Just seems like there's no online questions, so I'll conclude here. If you have any other questions, you can come up, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Salamun ala al-mursalin. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.